Movie story explained here. Today I'm going to show a 2000 survival drama film called Castaway. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. Chuck Noland, an executive analyst at FedEx, is a man of tight timetables and deadlines. He travels the globe, attending to issues at FedEx delivery hubs. He's in Russia, improving the hub's output, and he calls Kelly, his long-term lover, to inform her he'll be home in about 18 hours. When he returns to the United States, he meets up with Kelly and the two go to the Nolan family Christmas dinner, where Chuck's brother suggests that Kelly and Chuck marry. Although the two laugh it off, Chuck's tooth begins to hurt and he considers going to the dentist. Chuck had to leave for Malaysia due to an emergency. When the two review their schedule books, it's evident that Chuck is a man who prioritizes his work, especially since it's the holidays and he still plans to go. Kelly acknowledges this and tries to find a middle ground by asking Chuck to return home before New Year's Eve, which he agrees to. Kelly offers Chuck an antique watch, a family treasure, as a Christmas present at the airport. Chuck is moved by Kelly's present and reciprocates by giving her a gift. He hands her a little package that she mistakenly believes is an engagement ring. When Chuck returns, he tells her they'll open it on New Year's Eve. Chuck then takes off with 4 other members of the flight crew, and the trip looks to be normal. They run into a storm a few hours into the flight. Chuck overhears the pilots discussing how they've veered off course to dodge the storm, but that they're now out of radio range. As the storm intensifies, something within the plane explodes. Chuck and the flight crew are tossed around, but Chuck manages to grab a life raft in an emergency. Chuck notices the ocean approaching and, before he knows it, the plane is rocked and water rushes the cabin. He wakes up on his life raft on the beach of an uncharted island amid debris from the plane, including several FedEx shipments, a few hours later. Chuck surveys the island, discovers a cave, and climbs to the highest point on the island. He notices the body of a crew member floating nearby and rushes over to it. He realizes it's one of the crew members and realizes he's been pronouncing the man's name incorrectly all along. In the early morning, he buries the man and offers a little prayer. Chuck notices a ship and tries to signal it, but it is too far away. He climbs aboard his raft and, foolishly, attempts to flee the ship, but is destroyed by the waves. He crawls back to the beach after injured his leg in the reef and retires into the cave. He was about to die until he saw Kelly's watch and regained his will to live. Except for one package that has a pair of wings on it, Chuck opens the items he found on the beach the next day. He discovers VHS cassettes, ice skates, and a volleyball, which he names Wilson, in the crates. He's improvised with the tools he's found. Chuck collects food, water, and even manages to build a shelter. Chuck makes fire after many fruitless efforts, and his spirits are lifted. Now that I have access to warmth, light, and a way to make meals, I also have a volleyball partner in the person of Wilson. Chuck's tooth begins to hurt again while hunting, and he is compelled to execute a tooth extraction on himself. Years pass after he jams one of the ice skates in his mouth and smashes it with a rock, fracturing the tooth and passing out. Chuck has become accustomed to life on the island. His hair has gotten longer. He hunts effectively and can even calculate dates using his own solar calendar. His cave has also been refurbished, with painted faces now adorning it. When a giant piece of plastic floats into beach and Chuck gets the idea to transform it into a sail, their lonesome lives are turned upside down. Chuck begins felling coconut trees and gathers wood in order to build a raft. He then needs to construct a lot of rope and figures that he'll need to finish his raft, stock it, and get ready to go in as little as a few months to take advantage of the wind and tides. Chuck is halfway through building his raft when he discovers he requires additional rope. He tells Wilson that there is a method to collect 30 additional feet of rope but that he doesn't want to do it. He debates with Wilson before agreeing to get the rope. He ascends to a high vantage point and begins dragging a rope tied to a broken tree on the edge of a cliff. He raises a large object that resembles a person-shaped tree with a rope around its neck. Back at the cave, he tells Wilson about the tree dummy, revealing that he was experimenting with suicide. He was curious as to what would have happened if he had hung himself from that height and discovered that he would have broken his bones and died slowly. He tells Wilson that he didn't want to spend the rest of his life talking to a volleyball on a god-forsaken island. He becomes enraged and tosses Wilson out of the cave into the sea. He quickly regrets his decision and devotes some time to locating Wilson. At some point, all apologize to the volleyball. Chuck prepares to leave on his raft as time passes. He engraves his name and the fact that he'll flee into the sea on a boulder. After that, there was an endearing message for Kelly. Chuck launches his raft into the water, and it floats. He begins paddling through the reef and is repeatedly battered by waves. He notices a massive wave and braces himself and Wilson. He hoists the enormous plastic sail into the air, and the wind propels them over the crest of the wave. Chuck returns his gaze to the island he has called home for years before setting sail into the vastness of the wide sea. Chuck and Wilson travel for several nights and are pelted by storms, leaving them without food or water. When a dizzy Chuck awakens, he sees that Wilson has vanished. He swims after Wilson, but Wilson has gotten too far away from him. He now has to choose between getting Wilson back and retaining his hold on the raft. Chuck chooses to stay with the raft and expresses regret to Wilson for allowing him to leave. On the raft, crying and shouting passed out once more. A passing ship wakes up Chuck, and he is rescued. Back in the United States, Kelly receives a phone call and passes out from the news 4 weeks later, and Chuck is on a FedEx chartered aeroplane back to the United States. Simple luxuries that he had been missing on the island, such as soda ice and even comfortable clothing, greet him. He expects Kelly to meet him at the terminal, but he learns that he had a funeral and that Kelly had to leave. Kelly has also married and given birth to a child. Chuck is hailed by a swarm of FedEx employees in the media when he arrives at the airport. He enters the terminal after the wedding and is greeted by Kelly's husband, Jerry. He tells Chuck that Kelly is simply too overwhelmed to deal with him right now. Jerry walks away, and Chuck watches him leading a crying Kelly to their car through a window. Chuck is left alone in his hotel room after the FedEx staff celebration of his return, witnessing a mountain of food left behind by everyone. He also notices a small lighter on the table, noting how such a small and insignificant object can mean the difference between life and death on the island, and yet it is simply left out on the table. Chuck goes to Kelly's place that night, and the two reunite. They meet up again, and Chuck discovers that Kelly never stopped hunting for him until the day he was discovered. Chuck returns the watch, claiming that it is a family heirloom that should be passed down through the generations. With a heavy heart, Chuck returns the watch, as it was one of his inspirations to live and return to civilization. Chuck bemoans the fact that he had to leave that night. Kelly cries as she reminds Chuck of his commitment to return. Kelly invites Chuck to the garage, and Chuck is startled to see that Kelly has kept the car they had together. Chuck prepares to drive away before he could leave the driveway, and the two hug passionately. Kelly dashes out, and they share a kiss and reaffirm their love for one another. They hold each other with affection, but they realize that too much has changed. Kelly now has a family, and she can't abandon them no matter how much she loves Chuck. Sadly, the two part ways. Chuck tells a friend about the bittersweet experience of losing Kelly and surviving on the island after crashing. Returning to society only to discover that he had been presumed dead and that he had regained his life in Kelly, just to lose her again. Chuck travels to Texas in order to return an unopened package containing a pair of wings. When he arrives at a farmhouse, no one is there. He attaches a note to the gift, stating that it saved his life and thanking the person who sent it on his way out. He comes to a halt at a crossroads and consults a map. A woman in a farm truck approaches Chuck and cheerfully provides him with directions. Chuck notices a pair of wings painted on the woman's truck as she drives away. Chuck takes a step onto the crossroads and scans all 4 directions before smiling as he looks in the direction where the woman drove gone. Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications, and leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.